Hi there. We're right on the verge of the premiere for the second Game of Thrones spin-off series, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And I want to quickly go over some notes I took on interviews that the new showrunner gave on their overall approach to this new series. In this video, I address the point they really emphasized, that there is a directive handed down from George R. R. Martin himself that Duncan the Tall is literally the only POV character in the entire TV series. A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is based on a set of short prequel novellas that Martin wrote, and they're really the only prequel era that he's made with full prose text narrative. That other spin-offs like House of the Dragon are based on in-universe history books, so they're basically outlines that they're going off of. So this is the only one like the main novels that has prose text, but unlike the core novels, they do not have a large, sprawling cast of multiple POV characters. The first novel started with 8 POVs, and grew from there. 8 different storylines. It's not one book, it's more like 8. And that's not even getting into that there's big characters within the Jon Snow storyline, the Daenerys one, that within the Tyrion storyline, Tywin himself is not a POV, but when you translate this into television, it's still such a big presence, so the camera adds POVs like that. In contrast, Duncan the Tall is the only POV narrator in the novellas, because it's the difference between a 90-page novella and a sprawling 800-page book. So for the past 2 years, this has been a major question that all of the fan channels have had following along with the filming news of the past 2 years. How are they going to structure this? How would you translate that on screen? And I have made videos before, like over a year ago, on maybe they'll add in scenes with Egg, his squire, that there's points where Egg goes off screen in the book, maybe the camera would actually follow him. Well, we got our answer very prominently at New York Comic Con this past October, that after much trial and error, very much at the last minute, I was able to get a content creator badge to attend the New York Comic Con launch panel for the series. First week of October, huge event, and this was at the launch, not a separate interview video associated with it. I'm saying I saw this with my own eyes. And I'm emphasizing this because I don't go on the convention circuit that much. I've never seen Martin with my own eyes before. But it was George R. R. Martin and the new showrunner at a panel. I'm looking at it with my own eyes as they explain this principle that Dunk is the only POV. I'm sorry I haven't been able to do breakdowns since then, that my breakdown was the convention video, that I was at a convention, it ate up all my time, and my report was that I did post video clips, like a minute-long video clip of them explaining this. If you're a subscriber following along, that it was a big revelation to all of us, that no, there's a rule in place about this. And then we were busy with all the industry news and other junk coming out. I'm sorry I haven't been able to do this earlier, but that's where I was. This was the single biggest piece of news. Well, not just that the way Martin explained it, that this was a big revelation, even the book fans didn't know. Martin revealed that he originally intended or tried to give a section of the third novella to Egg's POV. Egg was going to be a POV narrator for a section of the third novella. But then he changed his mind, decided against it, and took it out. And you can kind of tell there's a point in the third novella where Egg leaves, does something, comes back, and reports on what he did. So this is a rule that Martin is applying to himself. This is a self-imposed rule on his own writing, which in turn he has handed down as a major directive to the new showrunner. Do not give standalone scenes to Egg. Egg in the Tales of Dunk and Egg. Much less standalone scenes to other characters. And point of this is, it's not something we can attribute to a decision of, oh, blame the showrunner, blame the writers. This is straight from Martin, that is so strictly faithful to his one POV rule for these novellas. And for a strict, faithful adaptation of these short stories, that's not really an issue. I'm not complaining. that's how they're written, but I had hoped they would expand more. No, I'm not saying that I wanted them to show parallel storylines in King's Landing and Winterfell. No, not like that. Just, I've talked about this in earlier videos, that I said, could we have like a 2-minute scene of other side characters talking to each other at the tournament after Dunk leaves a scene? I could even see why they would have a rule in place for this show focused on the commoners. That's the selling point. I can see why they'd have a rule: no scenes of the Targaryen royal family as POVs. Makes sense. Or even never have scenes that are from the POV of noblemen from the great houses, like Lord Baratheon talking to Lord Ashford. No, it's about the commoners. I can see that rule. I'd actually support that rule. But no, this extends to even other commoners, like Steely Pate, or Short Pate, or Tall Pate, or Tansel and the Dornish puppeteers. Tansel, I was really hoping would have like a 2-minute scene of like, after Dunk leaves, like her aunt or something coming, going, oh, what do you think of him? Blushing, going, well, he's so stupid and naive, but he's kind and earnest. Little things just to give them a little more personality. I'm not talking about an hour's worth of content. Spread out across the 3.5-hour season, I thought this might be all of 10 minutes of content. But the minor characters live and die by those moments of, I don't think Tansel should have a full hour of anything, but little moments that this shows off this other person. And yet, you'll never build up Tansel into an Arya-scale character or something. I get that. Well, that's not to say that there are no expansions. There are expansions, we have heard of this. And they talked about it at the panel. They said the rule is you can expand scenes that happened off the page, but they have to involve Dunk. You can invent scenes so long as they're Dunk POVs. And he said, well, I'm trying to make the novel... They always say that this is the novel Martin would have written if he'd been able to expand it more, but I get what he's saying, Parker. He seemed like an okay guy. That... Well, what they cited by name was there's a much longer scene of Dunk hanging out with Lord Baratheon at a feast they're having at night. Because Baratheon's like, I'm going to stick it to the Targaryens. I'll volunteer to be one of your trial of 7. So because he's supporting Dunk, that, okay, we'll have a longer feast. They go, they're drinking, they're singing songs and stuff. You see that in the trailers, but Dunk is in those trailer scenes. That makes sense of following this rule. Well, there were 2 things. Parker cited that, and he said there's a bit more with the Targaryens, but Dunk is present for it. Like, in the novella, when Dunk first meets Baelor and Maekar, they're having a discussion with each other about Maekar's sons that he overhears, and they go, hey, what are you doing here? And he's, oh, I'm waiting. I want to ask permission to sign up for the tournament. So maybe they'd be discussing, maybe that scene would run longer before Dunk interjects. Or they'd have a longer scene with Baelor, like we've seen other things in the trailer where he's going, how good of a knight do you think you are? You can expand scenes so long as Dunk is in them. And something I'm happy about is they have decided, yes, we can also have flashbacks, so long as they're flashbacks from Dunk's POV. Like a lot of cutaways to him and Sir Arlen, or... Most notably, we've heard there's going to be this like 10-minute really long flashback in the first episode to Dunk's youth in Flea Bottom, and it'll mention the Blackfire Rebellion, which makes sense because 10 years ago when he was a child, like the Blackfire Rebellion was happening, the climactic battle was just outside of King's Landing, he was living in the slums of King's Landing. They found a way to work it in that's still from Dunk's POV. That's in there, but they can't flash back to, and this is what Aegon the Unworthy did, giving Blackfire the sword to his bastard son, that they're not going to do that, or at least not this season. Another thing is, even in the trailers, you can see they will invent characters. They're not saying we can't invent characters, it's just you have to invent characters with Dunk's POV. Like those whores. Those seamstresses that Dunk is talking to of, oh, what's a hedge knight? Well, it's like a knight, but sadder. Like, they can expand on that. We've heard that there's more that they're doing with them. They even have their own little arcs and things, but it's through their interaction with Dunk. He's the surrogate for the audience. I mean, even when we're watching the Dornish puppet show, Dunk is in the audience as a surrogate for us, the TV audience, but even when it's focused on the Dornish puppet show, it's still technically from Dunk's perspective. And this works. This isn't really a problem in season 1, but the long-term, philosophical issue in the art of story writing, which I'm not a writer, it's just still, how do you handle exposition that isn't from Dunk's POV at all? The two specific things I'm thinking of are the Blackfire Rebellion, but also that there's this plague that breaks out between seasons 1 and 2. And it's interesting to compare this to the graphic novels, that Dunk and Egg actually has finished graphic novel adaptations, because they're not very long. And how did they do that with a visual format? Well, in the second graphic novel adapting the second novella, they actually do have really long flashback scenes. They're sepia-toned, and it's like a full issue of Lord Osgray narrating what happened as he's describing it to Dunk. And I feel that's the right way to do it, that it's still interacting with Dunk, so and Dunk is interjecting now and then. It's like a voiceover with word bubbles, because it's a comic, but a voiceover over images of a flashback. I get that. My fear is that they'll impose this restriction so to the letter, to such an extreme, that they'll go, no, you can't even have a visual flashback to Duncan Osgray talking about the Blackfire Rebellion, and then showing like Henry Cavill playing Daemon Blackfire or something, which I'm only half joking about. I think that might even happen, but the comic didn't even do a flashback for the plague, though. That it just showed a character describing it. Dunk and Egg happened to be in Dorne at the time. They closed the mountain passes, managed to quarantine, so they weren't affected. So later, Dunk meets someone who lived through it, and they're saying a third of King's Landing died, that bodies were going unburied in the streets. It was a nightmare. They don't even try to show that in the comic. Someone just describes it in dialogue. Of course, there are also practical considerations of budget. Just having a character describe the plague means you don't have to build a set for it. However, we know we're getting a flashback in season 1 to Dunk's youth in the slums of King's Landing. We have photos of this. They built an alleyway set. You can redress one alleyway set to stand in for a lot of streets just with artful editing. They already have it, so why not just have a brief, 2-minute thing of, and then the plague gutted the city, and it's really one alleyway filmed from multiple angles, but with hundreds of extras in it briefly, like large crowds of diseased extras and piles of unburied corpses, and maybe have some Targaryen guards marching through the street while banging on a drum, and shouting bring out your dead, boom, bring out your dead, boom, by order of Lord Bloodraven, bring out your dead, boom. To show there was a plague. I don't think that would be very expensive. It's sets they already have, but what are you going to do? In contrast, I think you could do the plague on the cheap. A full flashback to the climactic battle of the Blackfire Rebellion would be an expensive full-scale action piece. On the other hand, that's the selling point. It's this giant, cool action sequence that, not just a action sequence, looking through the comic adaptation, that is the action sequence of the entire second novella, are the flashbacks to the Blackfire Rebellion. Because the second novella doesn't take place at a tournament. You can't just pad out some time within here's another tourney round, which I think season 1 will be doing. There's no jousting in it. The one fight scene is at the very end, a trial by combat between Dunk and another knight. So if you want any action in season 2, it would kind of need to have flashbacks to the Blackfire Rebellion, visually, not just with dialogue. And I think that you can tie it into the Dunk POV rule with, he's talking over it as Osgray is describing what happened and he's asking questions and things. We'll have to see. And that's not even getting into the question of what happens when they surpass the print novellas, because there's 3 that are in print. I'll talk about this more later, but I think the 4th and 5th are mostly done. They're rough drafts. Martin has said they're mostly done. He's been working on them. And recently he said, I've shown all the unpublished material to Ira Parker, so I think that they could get through season 5 pretty well before it comes into this really isn't prose text at all, not even the unpublished rough draft. So like, oh no, 6 seasons into this, but it will come up eventually, like when you're doing like the third Blackfire Rebellion, other big events from the 50 years this is going to cover the entire lives of Dunk and Egg. What happens when you get to the point where it's not strictly Dunk's POV anymore, or you're not working off of a finished novella to say this? That Parker said some of the ideas he was shown, because there's like a dozen other Dunk and Egg ideas, they range from an almost finished rough draft, like for the 4th one, to literally a paragraph of, oh, like 30 years later, this is this other thing they do with the Rat, the Hawk, and the Pig. Like, structurally, how could you keep an entire thing on Dunk the whole time? Some of these stories need to alternate between characters. If you're really getting to the end of their lives, and I think this will be a sequel show, I don't think you could do this with the same actors, because 10 years from now you'd get to it, and this is when, like, Egg is a grandfather. When Tywin Lannister, young Tywin, would overlap with the later seasons in King's Landing, wouldn't Tywin be a POV in his own right? But other characters, too, they just come in and out of the story and everything, so that's a question for 6 seasons from now, and I'm hoping that it isn't as strictly enforced, but don't get me wrong, if there was one story, one prequel spin-off to adapt very strictly letter for letter, no, Dunk is the only POV, just like in the source material, this is it. That it'll never come up in any other spin-off. Targaryen Conquest, Nymeria, things we know they're discussing, Robert's Rebellion, because they aren't finished prose text. They never were. So if you're being too hard on House of the Dragon, oh, we had to invent things, House of the Dragon Season 2 is based on 20 pages of outline. Dunk and Egg Season 1, which is a third the runtime, is based on 90 finished pages of prose text. And even Ira Parker was saying that. I talked about in the last video on runtime, how the hell was I going to pad this out into a 10-hour thing? That he himself has admitted, this is easier than what House of the Dragon did. He was a writer on Season 1 of House of the Dragon, of this is so much easier because I'm just putting up on screen what was on the page with some minor refinements due to the shift in format. Still, this touches on various issues of, I know it's a smaller scale show, but others already pointed this out, I didn't, but saying, you know, technically this show automatically fails the Bechdel test. That there's never a scene of just 2 women talking to each other. Dunk has to be in the room, and even that trailer scene where the 2 whores are talking to each other, and mostly it's about them joking about Dunk. He isn't really the focus of the scene. He's not interacting with them. He might just be the everyman viewing something at the tourney from the crowd, but these are still things from his perspective. So in terms of representation with the gender or race or whatever, well, tell me in the comments your thoughts on this isn't going to have that many women in it. I mean, there are, like, Rohane Weber is a huge character, but interacting with each other separate from a man, because it's a small-scale short story focused on one guy. At least the big selling point for this one in terms of diversity is, for once, it's a show that focuses on the plight of the commoners, of the poor in general, that Dunk is a commoner looked down upon in a class system. Is transgressive in and of itself, I don't know. So just please share your thoughts on this, no wrong answers, of that is something that comes up, but I think it'll work. Oh, one thing they did mention during the New York Comic Con interviews, there are 2 exceptions to this rule, and this is rare exceptions, that 99% of the show is Dunk scenes. They said there are literally 2 scenes that he isn't in. The first of these 2 scenes, well, really the only one, is the cold open to episode 3, is a scene with Egg, which I'm guessing is probably going to set up the reveal about him at the end of the episode. We've already guessed that the end of episode 3 is probably the reveal about Egg. So I'm guessing the cold open is to set that up, but That was on purpose to contrast with how weird it is that there's this one scene that Dunk isn't in. There's also they said that there's going to be this second coda epilogue scene, like the very last scene, right at the credits. Dunk isn't in. It's the Targaryens remarking on what happened. So, okay, that makes sense that 99% is Dunk, with, count on one hand, literally 2 exceptions. And when they do, it's special. And thinking on it, this will also impact how they filmed it in terms of the cinematography, of how do you plan the cinematography for a show where there's only one POV for literally one character that has ripple effects on the cinematography style. And they have talked about that a bit. But I'm going to cover that in my next video, so please like and subscribe and follow me after the jump.